made it boring, now I'm buried in doom. What it mean to be alive? Not just chasing how you feel inside. Born to die, call that life. But that's a frame, not a fact, just a line. What it mean to be alive? If I'm still plugged in, still in the grind. Power and systems I don't define. Tell me, am I living or just online? I said I'm here to survive, now that's all that I do. Call it fact, but it started as a view. Live the definition till it's hard and it's real. Now I'm asking the world for meaning I build. We look at the facts and that's what they mean, but we the ones giving meaning to things. Reality, heavy definitions, old. Physical way from the stories we told. Can't snap my fingers, rewrite the play. Too many years live this way. Body, city, system in place. That's what happens when words leave a trace. Now look around, everybody unsatisfied. Even rich men scared of the drop in the stock price. Money system breathing like it got a soul. Purpose is to keep control. My life software pushing me to move. Chase that high, dodge that bruise. Positive spark, negative drain, battery life. Path to the game, making money serve life, but flip the view. Life just fuel for the system to use. Alternator spinning my fear and desire. I keep it charged, feed the fire. System don't run without me. Mind don't move without me. And I bow like I'm blessing what I power the helio. What it mean to be alive if I'm the source, but I won't decide if I give my breath to a thing I despise. Am I alive or just kept on lying? Life is one, life is equal. That's the line they never teach you to find from separation. Watch it decay, live again from day one. Play what's opposite of life, live whole. Non-existence, we're in control. Every bond built, missing all. Starts to crack, starts to fall. So who gon' change it? Not the machine, not the code, not the screen. Only source that can redefine. The one reading these lines. Alive ain't bliss, alive ain't highs. Alive is standing where meaning starts. Question the links, rewrite the role. Live as the source, not the battery pour. So tell me now, what you gon' be? A program running or life finally.
All right, test. All right, looks like my mic is good. I've been wanting to do these live streams for a little bit. Been considering it, and it's not like it's my first time live streaming, but I haven't used Kick before, so I also do a podcast that we do Sundays, and we talk a lot about what's going on in the world, putting it into context, all the different things that are popular on social media. And I wanted to do this because sometimes there's not enough time, even in a 3-hour podcast, to go into all the detail into something. So I'm going to be doing these more often to kind of go deeper into some points. And I thought for today, for my first one, I want to talk about 1776, the American Revolution, but in the context of what's going on in the world today. And all of this was stimulated from a video I watched on X, which I'm going to play in a moment. And it's Mark Levin. And for those who are not aware of what's going on, the U.S. is at war with Iran, or it's not technically a war. It's a military operation, but sometimes they're calling it a war. I think it's just whatever fits whatever they want people to perceive in that moment. They'll call it that. But, I'm 42. And so I was in high school during 9/11 when it happened. I remember watching it on TV. And, this memory never makes sense to me because I don't know why this would have happened. But I remember I was sitting in, I think it was like homeroom. And, the class we would go to before class starts. So we're sitting in homeroom, and, each of the classrooms had a TV in it. And I remember somebody coming, because we had cell phones, but it's not like we had smartphones. Nobody was on their phone, not even the teacher, like nobody. So we wouldn't have real-time access to what's going on in the world. But I remember somebody coming into the classroom and saying something to the teacher. The teacher turns on the TV, puts it onto a news program, and it's the scene of the Twin Towers, and one of them is smoking. And then, again, this is one of those things where it's like, did this really happen, or is it just how my mind remembers it? But what I remember is, no one really knew what was happening at the time. Like, the plane had just hit the first building, and it was really weird. And then we're watching the second one hit, and maybe that was just like a news replay or something. I just don't understand why my teacher would, or why anybody would have thought it was that significant. It could have just been an accident for all we knew. I mean, no one was really clear on what was going on. But whether we were watching the replay or not, we watched the second plane hit the second building. And then it became very obvious, okay, something's going on. And I remember, it wasn't that I felt really that scared. It was just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, what's happening right now? And I remember talking to my parents, and my grandparents were traveling at the time in the East Coast, so that was like a little bit, they were nervous about that, obviously. But, anyways, I bring that up because, that happened when I was in high school. And within 2 years, I was in university, and I remember being at a party on the weekend. I mean, kind of a weird thing to do at a party, but, I was in a military school, so maybe it made sense, but we were watching the TV the night that we invaded Iraq. And now this wasn't the first time we invaded Iraq, because the first time that I'm aware of anyways, that we invaded Iraq or went to war against Iraq was when I want to say I was like in kindergarten or first grade or something. And I remember it because I lived in Austin at the time, and we lived in this high rise. And when we would look out the balcony, we could see like protesters, and you could hear them protesting outside. And it's Austin. That's kind of a liberal city, so it made sense. And I remember my mom being worried because my dad was in the military at the time. He was in the army, in the, I want to say it was like the 1st Cavalry Division or something like that. I don't really remember. I remember the patch. It's like a yellow patch with a line, with like a bar diagonally, and then like a horse's head. So it was some kind of cavalry thing. But anyways, he was more of a medic, and he drove Humvees and stuff. Anyway, so she was just worried, like, is he going to get deployed? We didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't end up getting deployed to Iraq, but it was just a weird experience. And then fast forward, when I was in high school, 9/11, 2 years later, Iraq, and the shock and awe. And I remember watching the news programs with everything they were playing, the bombs, and just all the propaganda around it. And I remember George Bush standing on the aircraft carrier saying, "Mission accomplished." And man, it's just, at the time, they told us, we had to go to war with Iraq because they had weapons of mass destruction. I mean, I'm probably not saying anything anyone is not already aware of. It's just that I lived through it, And I'm explaining all that because now I'm looking at what's going on in the world today. And it's like the same shit happening again. And it almost feels a little bit like we're picking back up where we left off. And I remember watching this. I don't have it pulled up, but we talked about it on our podcast a few times. There's a video of General Wesley Clark talking about, and he was one of the military commanders at the time, and he talks about going, having somebody, I think he was talking to Rumsfeld or somebody, or maybe it was just some person working at the Pentagon, and they were saying that they had a plan at the time to invade. It was like Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran. There was like 7 countries, I think. And so I think the last one on that list, if I recall correctly, was Iran. And obviously we haven't invaded Iran yet, but I mean, it doesn't really seem like it's over yet. So I'm just looking at all that. And the thing that is different this time, though, And again, I'm saying this from experience. Like, I was there. It's one thing, meaning I lived through it. I saw what was happening. I remember what was happening. And it's different than if you just read about it as something that happened in the past that you didn't live through. You know, it's like if I read about World War I or World War II or the Civil War, I wasn't there. I mean, I don't remember it, right? So they can tell us whatever they want in the history books or on the news about those things, and we wouldn't know unless we knew somebody who lived through it. But then, of course, they would have probably some limited context, but they'd at least have their experience to say, you know, actually at the time, nobody was saying what they tell you now about what it all meant and what happened. That's not what was actually happening. So the difference now with the current conflict in the Middle East is that it's like the linkage between religion and why we were there wasn't so strong. Yes, 9/11 was apparently Muslim terrorists, so there's that part, but there wasn't this very strong point about like it's Christianity and Judaism versus Islam. And that's what it feels like right now. When I say feels like, I just mean that's what it looks like. It looks like the people on American and Israeli side, right? So that side versus the other side. It looks like it's a religious war, really. Especially when you start looking into, because I just watched with Tucker Carlson. Man, I don't think I have that one pulled up either. Or maybe I do. Let me look. Actually, I do. I'll play that one, actually. Let me see if I have this working. It's my first time using OBS to stream live, so I'm going to see if I can get this to work properly. I'm going to put it on this display over here. All right, so I'm going to do this. Okay. Well, I had YouTube playing earlier. I think that worked. So maybe we'll just watch a minute or so of this. So this is Joe Kent. He just resigned as what did he do? Let me look him up. He was like counterterrorism or something in the Trump administration. Joe Kent, former director of the United States National Counterterrorism Center. Right? And then he just resigned. He wrote a letter explaining why he resigned. So that's the context here. That's why he's talking to Tucker. But let me just play this, and I think I'll get some more context to what I'm talking about.
I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. How did you reach that conclusion?
I think this is key. I mean, this would be more challenging to explain had the Secretary of State, the President, and the Speaker of the House not come out and said that we conducted this attack at this time because the Israelis were about to do so. So that takes away the argument that there was an imminent threat, as in Iran was planning to attack us immediately. That just simply did not exist.
May I ask you to pause?
Sure.
And so I've heard people say that, and this just happened, but history has a way of getting rewritten in real time, and then you look back 10 or 15, 20, 25 years later, and no one seems to understand the things that you saw because they've been eliminated. Yeah. So I think it's important to stop and say, here's what we actually know. So I'd like now, if we could, just to play one of the statements that you alluded to, and that's from Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. And this was shortly after this war commenced. And he was explaining, as is his habit, in a thoughtful, precise way, why.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, what they're about to play, Marco Rubio, it was like right after we started the, I don't know if it's bombing or we were just sending missiles. I'm not sure. It's probably a combination of both. But like this was only a couple weeks ago? I don't even know. It's been maybe a week or so that we started that whole thing. In terms of this time around, of course, we bombed Iran's nuclear facilities months ago at this point, I think. But this is the reasoning that Marco Rubio gave right after we did this most recent attack on Iran.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Okay, so that is his almost contemporaneous.
So that's pretty wild, actually, because right out the gates, they said Israel was going to attack Iran, then Iran would retaliate, and that's why we did it first. And, I mean, it makes sense if that's the true story. It makes sense why the U.S. would attack Iran in that scenario, because assuming there's nothing they could do to stop Israel from attacking in the first place, who would be the target other than Israel? It would be all the U.S. military bases, right, in the area, of which there are many. So the logic makes sense. I'm not saying it's justified or not, but the logic of it does make sense. But now, so fast forward to today, so that must have been whenever the strike happened. It must have been a week or two ago at the most. If you fast forward to now, that's not what they're saying. I mean, that's the thing about the way information works now. It's so different than when I was a kid or when I was younger in high school. You would think that with social media, because everyone can communicate and because everyone can share information, you would think it'd be easier to know what's really going on. But if you're in the position of, let's say, the elite, you're aware that social media exists. You're not going to allow it to be used in a way where people actually can very easily discuss what's really going on because you want to control the narrative. Then you would say a lot of different things about why you're doing something. You would say a lot of different things about what's happening, because everybody would just be confused. And I saw this funny meme. It was like Trump, and it was kind of like dressed up in like Chinese warrior clothing. And it was like a fake quote from like Sun Tzu, but it was like Trump Zoo or something. And it said, when you have no plan, the enemy can't know your plan. Like as if that was like some aphorism from Sun Tzu, Art of War. And so it's funny because I know a lot of people are like, oh, Trump's an idiot. Like they don't know what they're doing. They're incompetent. I don't think that's the case. But that doesn't mean I can realize they're very smart, but also not agree with what they're doing at the same time. It'd be much easier just to say, well, they're just such idiots, and idiots are running the world. And I mean, yeah, I guess from a certain perspective, doing a bunch of things that ultimately are not best for everybody is going to create a bunch of consequences. So that is stupid to do. So I'm not sitting here saying, no, they are the smartest people ever and that are the smartest people possible. No, but they're not stupid, right? Meaning, if you take a random person out of Walmart who works at Walmart, no offense to people who work at Walmart, but if you take somebody who works at Walmart and you put them in Trump's position, there's no way they'll be able to handle that at all. And that's not necessarily because Trump is the smartest person ever, but he does understand some things in a very specific way, and he can handle information, and he knows how to communicate. It's very easy to see how he communicates to the public and say he's an idiot, but that's not necessarily how he communicates behind closed doors. The same thing happened with George Bush, where again, because I was a kid, I lived through all that. I remember the perception of George Bush being like, oh, he's an idiot, because he would say the most retarded shit on interviews or just talking and stuff. And I don't know, maybe he was just there because he's a puppet and his dad was, the former president, head of the CIA at one point, the vice president at one point, and then the president. And so he's just got his son there as well, following along and doing what he's told. But at the same time, I think being in those positions is a lot harder than people realize. And so, again, it's easy to just sit and say, oh, well, these idiots, I could do that, No, you couldn't. Not with what you know right now, because if you could, you would. Look at your own life and ask yourself, how much responsibility are you actually taking in your life right now, other than just going to work, entertaining yourself, or maybe you have a hobby or something. How much actual responsibility do you take in your life, in this world? So it's not to say that like, oh, these people are so amazing because they take so much responsibility. Like, they take responsibility within the position they're in, and it's not as easy as it looks. So I think there's some credit due to them, that they're not just incompetent idiots, but that also doesn't mean that they know everything. They don't. So I can recognize that. But going back to the George Bush point, there was this perception that he was just an idiot. And it's like people do the same thing about Trump. And I think that's dangerous to do, because if you just say the guy's an idiot and doesn't know what he's doing, I mean, there's no solution in that. It's just like a very easy way, actually, to let yourself off the hook for having to do anything in this world, having to take any responsibility whatsoever. So, yeah, I just don't buy that. But I guess going back to the kind of getting to where I want to go with this, to a certain degree, they know what they're doing. Just because it looks disorganized, and just because they're telling you 5, 6, 7 different reasons for every single thing they do, doesn't mean they don't have a specific plan that they're carrying out. I think it's the next level of strategy in a world where information travels very quickly and information can be spread very quickly. And so that's why you have, I saw a couple days ago, the big thing was, or one of the big things anyways, was this audio going around that was apparently Erica Kirk in a voice recording doing some human trafficking or something like that for Epstein. And I listened to it because I see the post, and I was like, okay. And then it wasn't more than like, probably later that day or maybe the next day, people are saying, oh, actually, it wasn't her. It was this other person. She's well known to be in the files. And so, but it was clearly like this. It would be so easy for someone to put that information out there, knowing that the conspiracy theory podcasters, streamers, whatever, would jump on it because it validates their bias, that they don't like Erica Kirk for whatever, or whatever it is. And then when it's easily shown to be not true, then they look like an idiot. So people would lose trust in them. So I'm just saying there's this next level of informational warfare going on where you really just don't know what's happening. Now, that being said, I don't just look at what is being said. I look at the total context of all the things I'm aware of, and I'm constantly researching and studying what's going on, what's happened in the past. And, I'm sure a lot of people say like, oh, I do the research. But it's one thing to do research. It's another thing to check your biases constantly when you're doing research. Just looking stuff up online and then it validating your bias, and then you assuming it's true, and then forming your picture of what you think is going on based on that, it's always going to lead you to just accepting some narrative that somebody wants you to accept. So you always have to check, and this is what I do, I always have to check whether something is true or not. Why would I want to believe it? Or why would I not want to believe it? What is my bias? Or am I actually looking at the information and evaluating it based on, does it make sense or not, right? And you can't always know if something makes sense just on that basis, but that's a much better guide than if you like it, just because it fits your bias. So I think that's where a lot of the divisiveness within politics is coming from, and politicians know how to play that game very well. Both sides do it, all sides do it. They constantly manipulate the emotional biases in everybody so that it creates impressions within you, so that you will dislike or you'll like somebody. And that's just essentially what politics is at the moment. It's just manipulating all of that. So when I look at all this stuff, you have to really within yourself check and see, like, what are my assumptions? What are my biases? And am I really putting the pieces together that I see in a way where it's not just confirming something I want to be true, but I'm actually seeing what's going on, right? And that's a difficult thing to do for most people because they actually don't know very much and they have a lot of bias. So, for example, and I'll kind of get into some of this too, because it's kind of the point of what I wanted to do tonight. Going back to what I was saying earlier with this guy, I think I mentioned Mark Levin. Okay, here was the context for that. So I showed this Joe Kent guy first. Well, let me switch my screen back. I showed this guy Joe Kent, right? So he just left the Trump administration, gave his resignation letter, basically said there was no imminent threat from Iran, that they're saying now they were going to send missiles at us. We had to do something, but that's not what they were saying in the beginning. Just based on my assessment, I think this is what's going on, is that Israel was going to attack Iran because they want to force them into some kind of conflict. And the U.S. decided, was it, oh no, Israel's going to attack, we better do something? Or was it like, Israel said we're going to attack so that we could have the justification of doing it, and they didn't really have any intention of doing it without U.S., cooperation and permission? You don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. But from my perspective, there was an intention to attack Iran, regardless of whether they were about to attack anybody. Okay, so this guy resigns, and then I see, let's see, where is he? Mark Levin, right? So you can see that, yeah. So Mark Levin is a Fox News host. I think he used to be a radio host. Maybe he still is. And I'm just going to play what he says, and then I'll make some comments on it.
If you reject Judaism and you reject Christianity and you reject the link of the two, you reject the Bible. If you reject Judaism and Christianity and the brotherhood and the sisterhood of the two, not only are you rejecting our founding, you're rejecting our country. If you reject Judaism.
So this might seem kind of random based on what I was saying earlier, but again, going back to that point I was making of, it was not so explicit when I was a kid or a teenager, whatever, that we were going to war on the basis of it's because of our religion of Christianity / Judeo-Christian points. It was just more like, in America, we're so free and we can kind of do whatever we want. And the Muslims just hate that. They really just hate the fact that we're free. And it was never explained why they hate it. We just took it for granted. I'm telling you, man, we were stupid. Like, everybody was dumb back then. They're still dumb, but I'm saying we were really dumb really dumb. They didn't even have to really explain much. Although, ironically, they're explaining less now. I don't know. Maybe everyone's just been dumb, and they're still dumb, and there's no point in saying whether we were more or less dumb. I think really the only thing that's changed is how we consume media. So back in the day, the internet was very different than it is now. When I say back in the day, I mean like back when I was in high school. The internet was very different. There was no YouTube when I was in high school. When I was in high school, nobody was on their phone. I mean, this is going to definitely date me, but you would, we had these graphing calculators. I don't know if they still use them in schools. Probably not at this point, but there's like these big, giant calculators with lots of buttons, and you could make graphs on them. And, you would use them for mostly like calculus, really, physics. There was a few classes where you would need a calculator like that. You could use it on the SAT as well. And so a lot of us had these calculators, and there was like games you could play on them that were super rudimentary, like black and white, basically. Like there was this one we used to love to play in school. I forget what it was called, but it's that one where you have like this bar that goes across the bottom. Oh, let me switch this back. I'll get used to this. Okay, there we go. It has like this bar, there's like a ball, and it goes up and hits the block, and then you have to hit it back, and then you keep trying to break all the blocks, and you keep going and going until you get a high score. So it was like a big thing of like who's the current high score record holder in the school. And I went to a very small private school for high school, so the competition wasn't too fierce. But I'm just trying to paint the picture that that's what we were doing in high school, playing basically Pong on our calculators. We weren't on our phones, And the way you would get information about what's going on in the world is you'd watch TV. Some people, I guess, would read the newspaper, like our parents or whoever, and there'd be like magazines. But really, nobody was getting their information from the internet. It's not that you couldn't go there for information, but you weren't seeing that as a primary source. I mean, this whole thing of getting your information primarily from online is really only maybe the past, let's see, it's 2026. I don't know. It doesn't matter. 10 years, 15 years, I'm not really sure. But definitely when I was in high school, that's not how we got our information. So it was so much easier to control the way people perceive things, because it's like there's one narrative. You have Fox News, you have CNN. They're basically pushing the same narrative. They're just on two different sides of that narrative. Now, you go on X, there's a million different narratives. It's not like one narrative. I mean, clearly, everyone knows this. I'm not saying anything anyone doesn't already know. I'm just trying to put it into context. So it's just so fascinating, because even back then it was like, yeah, we're going to war because they have weapons of mass destruction and they're going to kill us all, and the Muslims hate us because we're free, and we want to spread our freedom to them, and for some reason they don't like it, but we want to spread democracy to them and so forth, right? And like looking back on it, it's just so obvious that's a total psyop, like it's obvious, right? But it's still just happening right now. But what's different now is like it's so extreme, the reasoning that they're giving behind everything, And if I were to boil it down, it's like Iran hates the Jewish people and they hate Israel. They want to destroy Israel. As America, we have to protect Israel because America is a nation that was founded upon Christian, which includes Judaic, Jewish religion as well, right? Because you have the Old and the New Testament. The Old Testament is what the Jews follow, plus maybe some other things that they add outside of that, but that's like the basic core of it. Not even all of it, I don't think, but let's just say the Old Testament. And then the Christians have that plus the New Testament. But all of that, but since it's like, it's kind of like if you, it's like you had a season 1 and a season 2 of a show, and one person really only ever liked watched season 1. You've watched season 1 and season 2, but because they've watched season 1, they're also a fan of basically the same show. So it's like that. It's so weird to me because, when you look at Judaism versus Christianity, and I went to a Catholic school, I've read the Bible multiple times. I've studied all the apologetics on Christianity that I can find. So I know all the various different arguments and reasonings and ideas and denominations and all these points. And it just actually doesn't make sense why a Christian would feel that they need to somehow take the Jewish faith under their wing and protect it. Not that we shouldn't protect people generally that are being abused or being harmed by somebody, but it's like they feel this special sort of sense of protection over it because of the Old Testament being in their Bible. But the reason why it doesn't make sense is because the people who did not become Christian, who stop at the Old Testament, are basically saying, we think you, who went and believed in the New Testament, we think you're full of shit. Otherwise, they'd be like, yes, let's also accept that as well. And it's funny because, okay, if you look at Mormonism, right? They don't like being called Mormon now, apparently. But if you look at Mormonism, right, and I don't really care about all the weird stuff that people say about it. There's weird stuff in every religion. But Joseph Smith, the guy who basically created the religion, or was the originator of it, he had a vision. Where is it? He had a vision. He said that God the Father and his Son Jesus Christ appeared to him and instructed him to join none of the existing churches because they were all wrong. So basically, he was like, oh, Jesus came and visited him and told him, you know, there's a lot of details to it, but basically, like, all the stuff that you've known so far with Christianity and so forth, all the way up to that point, it's not quite right. There's a little bit more to it. Or there's some things that are, like, actually incorrect, and we're going to correct that. So they created a new book. So you've got the Old Testament, the New Testament, and their Newer Testament, right? Which is, I think, called the Book of Mormon. And I bring it up because if you talk to a mainstream Christian, whatever that means, and you say, you know, let's just say you ask them, like, hey, do you have a problem with other Christians that are a different denomination? They'd be like, well, no, not really. Or maybe they'd be really hardcore or something and say, like, no, only my denomination is correct. But I think generally most average Christians are like, you know, I don't really have a problem with Catholics. I'm a Methodist or I'm a Baptist, and they do some weird things that I don't like, but they still believe in Jesus. Not a big deal, right? And Jews are fine because they have their special place. Even though they don't accept Jesus, I wish they would, but it's not a big deal. But then if I said, oh, okay, so you're cool with Mormons who are also Christian, and they'd be like, what? No, Mormons are not Christian. They are not Christians. They're blaspheming. They got their own weird ideas. And so if you're a Christian, you know, TM, and you look at Mormons as like, they're crazy. They're making up their own shit. It doesn't make any sense. I don't agree with it. Like, no, I don't accept them. Wouldn't that be sort of like how really strict adherents to the Jewish faith would feel about Christianity? Like, no, you've totally distorted and gone off the rails, you know, to the point where I think Jewish people who are religiously Jewish, I'm not talking about just ethnically Jewish, but like religiously Jewish, who like, you know, follow their religion, you know, and I'm sure there are different versions of it as well, but they all, I believe, have this sort of idea that there's some kind of a Messiah who will come at some point, and that will be a good thing, and it'll change things in the world for the better. So they're like waiting for a Messiah to come. But the Christians believe he already came. He's going to come back, but he already came. So they're basically saying, like, no, the guy you believe in, who you think is the Messiah, already came. He was already there. He was here. You got to believe in him. And they're like, no, that guy's a liar. He's lying. He's not really the Messiah. That was fake. That's not real. Believe what you want, I guess, but no, we don't accept it. So it's kind of like the Christians saying that to the Mormons. No, Jesus didn't visit Joseph Smith. That's not true. It's the same thing. So that's what's weird about it. Because they don't see that they're, from the perspective of the Mormon to the Christian's kind of in the same position with the Jew, the religious Jew. So that's kind of all things I'm looking at, right? Just generally speaking, because so much of what's going on in the world right now, even before this conflict with Iran, so much of it is in a way justified by the religious point. So that's why I'm looking at it all, right? And there's other reasons too, but as I do more of these streams, I'll explain more of that, or maybe even later in this one. But when I saw that clip, I don't know if I played it or not. The Mark Levin one. Yeah, I played it already, yeah. Where he's talking about if you reject Judaism and Christianity, you're rejecting the Bible. And if you're rejecting Judaism and Christianity, you're rejecting the... Let me go back and play it. I want to hear what he says. It's that second thing he says.
If you reject Judaism and you reject Christianity and you reject the link of the two, you reject the Bible.
I don't really understand that part. Why do you need to reject? What do you mean the link of the two? It's like, well, I'll get into that more later.
If you reject Judaism and Christianity and the brotherhood and the sisterhood of the two, not only are you rejecting our founding, you're rejecting our country.
Okay, that part. If you reject them and the linkage of the two, he's not just saying if you reject Judaism or you reject Christianity. He's saying if you reject the linkage of the two, then you're rejecting what was the first thing you said?
Our founding.
Our founding.
You're rejecting our country.
You're rejecting our founding and you're rejecting our country. So maybe it took a long time to get to this point to kind of show you the evidence of what I'm saying. This is why I'm looking at this. Because Mark Levin, even though it seems like he's just randomly talking about Jesus and or Judaism and Christianity and so forth and rejecting our country, what is the bigger context of what he's talking about? He's talking about the war with Iran, right? He's talking about the fact that anybody is not agreeing with us doing that. Because the whole idea is they're the enemy of Israel and America, right? And I'm not saying that they're not. I'm not saying that they're friendly to America. I'm not saying they haven't funded groups that have killed American soldiers or that have killed Israelis or that have killed Jews around the world. There are many examples of that. But what is our actual beef with them? You know? And it doesn't mean I have to be on their side, per se. But why are we in this conflict? Right? Why do Iranian, at least government-type people, maybe I'm not talking about the Iranian people themselves, because I don't know what they personally all think, but let's just say the leadership of the country, why do they hate Israel? Why do they hate America? And I'm not asking that from the perspective that they're therefore somehow justified in their hate, any more than we're justified in our hate of them. But I think if you were looking at it from their perspective, there's things that either our country, when I say our, I'm in America, the United States, or Israel have done that was not good for them, right? Maybe you couldn't point to specific acts of terrorism, although maybe there are, but do we control, I say we, Israel and the U.S., do we control essentially the world economy? And do we make decisions that affect Iran negatively in some cases? Do we put sanctions on them? And of course, we can go back and forth all day long on, well, but it's because they did that, right? And I say, well, but we did this before that. Maybe that's why they did that. You say, well, but before that, they did this, right? And you could just keep going and going and going forever and ever and ever on that. So it doesn't really answer the question, because it's more just like at some point, our side believes they started it. But all I'm saying is that's probably what the other side thinks too, right? Unless we're just going to believe, no, that other side is just evil. They're just bad and they're evil, and that's really all it comes down to. Which, I don't have a problem saying that somebody is doing something evil and there's no justification for it, and it's not justified. It's not because somebody else did something else. If I choose to do something evil and spiteful, I'm the one that's responsible for that. But I don't know that's really the story of what's going on there, which is not to say I assume it all started on our side. But let's just look at it. You've got one religion, and then over here, if you listen to Mark Levin, over here on our side is some kind of linked other set of religions. You've got the two religions over here versus this one here. And it might seem, if you have no context for what I'm talking about with Mark Levin, what does he have to do with any of this in particular? Why am I looking at him specifically? Because he's been going really hard against Tucker Carlson, who was interviewing that other guy, because Tucker Carlson's kind of like, I don't agree with this war at all. So he's on the side of, we shouldn't be doing this. Mark Levin's on the side of, we definitely should be doing it. And Trump, put out a tweet. See if I can find it. Trump tweet Mark Levin. Here it is, right? He says, Mark Levin, a truly great American patriot, is somewhat under siege by other people with far less intellect, capability, and love of our country. So he's just, basically saying how great he is. Mark Levin only cares and wants one thing: greatness and success for America. Those that speak ill of Mark will quickly fall by the wayside, as do the people whose ideas, policies, and footings are not sound. They are not MAGA. I am. And MAGA includes not allowing Iran, a sick, demented, and violent terrorist regime, to have a nuclear weapon to blow up the United States of America, the Middle East, and ultimately the rest of the world. So this is more context for why I'm talking about Mark Levin. And it'd be one thing if it was just, hey, he's a guy who loves America and he doesn't want us to be hurt. But that's not really all there is to it. There's this really specific point of linking the justification for why we are enemies with Iran is because there's Christians and Jews, and it's them against the Muslims. That's what's going on. And so to kind of circle back to what I was saying earlier, when I was a kid, that was not, I'm not saying nobody thought about it like this, but the general conversation was not, it's literally a religious war, right? And now, obviously I'm only giving a couple pieces here, but when you look at all the things that are being said in the media, all the different talking heads, the podcasters and so forth that are for the war in Iran, it all comes down to this sort of religious justification. And so I saw this clip with Mark Levin. I thought it was kind of interesting because when he says, you're rejecting our country.
Our founding
I keep forgetting the word. The founding. That's the specific word. The founding. So when I hear something like that, the way I process that is I'm like, okay, is that true? He's saying that if you reject Judaism and Christianity and the linkage between the two, and remember the context of this is you're against the war in Iran, so that's why this matters. You're against the founding of the country, right? So I went to school. I went to public school up to high school, and then I went to a private school. But it's not like the actual information you learn in private school is any different than public school. There's just higher standards. You just have to have more self-discipline, and you're in a more specific environment. It's a little bit more competitive, right? But it's not like you learn different information. You still learn the same history. You still learn the same math. You still learn the same science. So I start thinking, okay, because I've heard this my whole life. I'm sure you have too. America we're founded as a Christian nation, right? But is that true? Like, where does that come from? Other than we learned it in school, everybody repeats it. I'm like, where? And maybe it is true, right? This is how I'm processing the point, right? Like, maybe it is true. I don't know, but I want to know if it's true. So I don't remember how I stumbled on this, but I started looking. For some reason, I started looking up Thomas Jefferson, all right? And, okay, yeah, you can see it on there. Now, maybe I need to zoom in a little bit. Let me see here. I'm going to try to make it a little bigger. Okay, this is not the one I'm looking for. I'll come back to this one later. Benjamin Rush. No, not that one. Well, actually, I could talk about that one. So I discovered that Thomas Jefferson, who is the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence, so the guy who wrote the document that said America is going to declare its independence from Great Britain. We don't like what's been going on, the way the king treats us, the way, they have their whole list of reasons why. It's not like I'm just finding some random dude who was like at the, signing of the Declaration and he was like, yeah, I agree. This is like the guy who wrote it, right? Everybody knows who Thomas Jefferson is. He's on, what is it, the nickel, I think, right? And I think he's on one of the, is he on one of the $20 bill, I think, right? So he's like on our currency. He's one of our founding fathers. He's not just some random one. Like, I don't know how many signers of the Declaration there are. Let's see. I keep going to that keyboard, but that's not going to work because my mic is there. Let's see. How many signers to the Declaration? Oops. Maybe I should spell it right. Declaration of Independence. A total of 56 delegates. Is it just 56 total then? Yeah, so here's all the guys. That looks probably about 56. And we've got John Adams, right? I think he became president, right? Samuel Adams. Pretty sure he made some beer, right? He was a merchant. Isn't that, I think the beer's named after him. I think that's like his brewery, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm saying, like, have you even heard of this guy, Josiah Bartlett? Carter Braxton? I mean, William Floyd. I wonder if he's any relation. Would it be funny if it said Minneapolis? I mean, Ben Franklin. It's like, okay, John Adams, Sam Adams, heard of them. I have to scroll down like 10 people to even get to the next guy anybody's heard of. And we're going to keep going. Oh, John Hancock. We all know John Hancock because he had that big fancy signature. A bunch of other guys no one ever has heard of. Thomas Jefferson. Plantation owner. Uh-oh, that's not good. A A bunch more guys no one's ever heard of. A bunch more guys. Robert. No, that's not. I wonder if he's related to Thomas Paine. I don't know. Benjamin Rush. Oh, that'll be interesting. That'll be relevant later because I think one of the letters I have. Yeah, that's the one I was looking at. Is to Benjamin Rush. So, okay, let me go back here. Never heard of any of these guys, right? This guy's name is William Williams. That's pretty ridiculous. Yeah, okay. I think maybe of these people, you probably recognized 4, 5, maybe 6 names. You know, unless you're some kind of scholar of the American Revolution, I doubt you've heard of most of these names, right? So, I'm saying Thomas Jefferson's not just some random dude. He's like the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence. Okay. So if we're going to start looking into what did the founders actually think? Like if you're going to say to me that the founding of our country is based on Judeo-Christian values, right? And that if you don't support them, those values and the linkage of these two things, that somehow you're against our founding. You're against the country. Well, you know, then you would expect that Thomas Jefferson probably would say something like that, right? He would probably say stuff like, and you must understand that the Judeo-Christian values are some of the most important values, and we are founding this country on the basis that these values are important. Okay? You know, a side note here. A side note would be, I was thinking about this morning. Maybe I'll just look it up, because instead of me just telling you, because, you know, if I look it up, then you know I'm not just making stuff up. I don't know if I can get my mouse back over here. Was Great... Well, I should probably look at the screen. Great Britain involved in the Vietnam War. In 1700s, a Christian nation. Well, the AI says it was, so you know it's true. But let's just see what it says. Okay, I'm not going to discount it just because it's AI. Yes, Great Britain in the 1700s was overwhelmingly a Christian nation, characterized by an established state church. They were so Christian, they had a government church, okay? A Protestant majority and religious laws that heavily influenced social and political life. The Church of England, Anglican, was the state church. As far as I remember from what I learned in school and all that, is that the Church of England is really just the same, or at least it was anyways, basically the same as the Catholic Church. They just made their own version because the king wanted to be able to be divorced. That's the story I was told. The monarch is the supreme governor of the church. Okay, so they were super Christian, is my point. So imagine being back then. Imagine what's the argument exactly? So you're Thomas Jefferson, you're all the guys in the American colonies, and you're like, we need to have a country founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Let's just say Christian for now, okay? Christian principles. You know, which we would assume obviously includes the Judeo stuff, right? I think every Christian believes that, right? So we don't even just say Judeo-Christian. They just say Christian, right? Well, why then would they have a problem with Great Britain? It was a super Christian nation. Like, so Christian they had a state church. What's the problem then? Like, it doesn't even make sense. So you have one people want to say, we want to be a Christian nation, but we don't want to be that Christian nation. That already makes it not make sense, okay? So now I only thought about that later, just because it kind of popped into my head as an obvious contradiction. But then, okay, so let's just put that aside because it doesn't make sense, but whatever. We'll just ignore that for a moment. So I'm reading this, so I found this letter. I don't know if this was the first one I found, but, oh no, this isn't the one oh yeah, okay. This was the first one I found. And this one I think is way more interesting, but it's a little bit longer. So let's just see what he says. He always starts off by talking about how great it is that the person wrote to him or how great it was that they talked recently. We just don't talk like this anymore. Imagine if you texted your friend and you were like, I was so appreciative of the delightful text I received from you 5 seconds ago. Okay. I'll just read it. In some of the delightful conversations with you in the evenings of 1798 to 99, which served as an anodyne to the afflictions of the crisis through which our country was then laboring. Do you know what the word anodyne means? Oops. Look up. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know you could do that. Not likely to provoke dissent or offense. Yeah, I was like, that didn't really make sense. A painkiller, right? A palliative, right? So basically like some kind of a painkiller, something to make it not so bad. So anyways, so he had these great conversations that were an anodyne to the afflictions of the crisis through which our country was then laboring. 1798 would have been, 22 years after the revolution. So they would still be in the process of creating the country, going through all the growing pains of being a new country and all that. Where was I? The Christian religion was sometimes our topic. Here we go. All right. So now they're going to talk about how the country was founded on Christian principles. This is great. Okay. And then I promised you that one day or other, I would give you my views of it. That seems odd to say. You would think they would all know their views on it because that's why they created the country, right? They created the country on the guy who wrote the Declaration 22 years, well, actually at this point, 1803, it's like basically 30 years afterwards. You would think 30 years ago, it would be pretty crystal clear what their religious views were, since that's what they founded the country on. But in any case, I promised you that one day or the other I would give you my views of it. They are the result of a life of inquiry and reflection, and very different from that anti-Christian system. Okay. So, he's not okay with anti-Christians. That sounds like he's a Christian, right? Imputed to me by those who know nothing of my opinions. All right. To the corruptions of Christianity, I am indeed opposed. Okay, what the hell is he talking about here? What do you mean corruptions of Christianity? But let's move on. But not to the genuine precepts of Jesus himself. Okay, hold on. So he said he would give... Okay, so his views are a result of a life of inquiry and reflection, and very different from that anti-Christian system imputed to me by those who know nothing of my opinions to the corruptions of Christianity. I am indeed opposed. But I'm not opposed to the genuine precepts of Jesus himself. I am a Christian. Okay, so Mark Levin was right. Or was he? Oh, wait, so I just should have kept reading. I am a Christian in the only sense in which he wished anyone to be. Sincerely attached to his doctrines, in preference to all others. Okay. Ascribing to himself every human excellence, and believing he never claimed any other. At the short intervals since these conversations, when I could justifiably abstract my mind from public affairs, this subject has been under my contemplation. So it sounds like when he was writing the Declaration of Independence, he hadn't really already considered all this. I don't know. But the more I considered it, the more it expanded beyond the measure of either my time or information. In the moment of my late departure from Monticello, I received from Dr. Priestley his little treatise of Socrates and Jesus Compared, this being a section of the general view I had taken on the field. It became a subject of reflection, while on the road, and unoccupied otherwise. The result was to arrange in my mind a syllabus or outline of such an estimate of the comparative merits of Christianity, as I wished to see executed by someone of more leisure and information for the task than myself. This I now send to you as the only discharge of my promise I can probably ever execute. I guess because he's basically saying, like, look, I don't have the time to write all of this out. A whole big exposition of what I actually believe and think about all this. I'm getting older, I suppose. So he's not going to be able to do that, but this is where he's going to lay it out, basically. So that's cool. And in confiding it to you, I know it will not be exposed to the malignant perversions of those who make every word from me a text for new misrepresentations and calumnies. I am moreover averse to the communication of my religious tenets to the public. That's weird, isn't it? You would think he'd be out there telling everybody everything he believes. I mean, he wrote the Declaration. Because it would countenance the presumption of those who have endeavored to draw them before that tribunal, and to seduce public opinion to erect itself into that inquisition over the rights of conscience, which the laws have so justly proscribed. It behoves every man who values liberty of conscience for himself to resist invasions of it in the case of others, or their case may, by change of circumstances, become his own. It behoves him, is that just the word behoove? It's just some old version of that? It behoves him, too, in his own case, to give no example of concession, betraying the common right of independent opinion by answering questions of faith which the laws have left between God and himself. Accept my affectionate salutations. All right, so didn't really say much, but it does seem, in terms of actually saying what he believes, but it is interesting that he said, betraying the common right of independent opinion. Does that sound like somebody who would agree with the statement? If you reject this linkage between these two religions, then you're rejecting the founding of our country. It seems like he's kind of on the opposite side, that like you can have an opinion and that's a good thing. Okay, so I'm going to move on because I just thought that was interesting. I think before I get to this one, because this is really the grand finale of all these letters, I think, because he doesn't have like a lot of letters that I found where he talks about his religion, his faith, and so forth. Maybe there's more I haven't seen, but here's a letter he wrote to Peter Carr, and there's a lot of stuff. He's just giving his perspective on different things. But here he's literally talking about the subject of religion. And he's saying to this guy, Peter, your reason is now mature enough to receive this object. So meaning you're basically mature enough now, you're smart enough now to be able to consider religion. In the first place, divest yourself of all bias in favor of novelty and singularity of opinion. Indulge them in any other subject rather than that of religion. It is too important, and the consequences of error may be too serious. And I guess that's kind of echoing what I was trying to say earlier when I was saying, like, when you're considering information, you really need to remove your bias. Otherwise, you'll accept something as true because you want it to be true, or you like it to be true, or you like what the person's saying, but that doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it correct. It doesn't make it valid. So that's basically what he's saying here. Why? Because, it might matter in reality. Anyway, so on the other hand, shake off all the fears and servile prejudices under which weak minds are servilely crouched. Fix reason firmly in her seat, and call to her tribunal every fact, every opinion. So every fact that you encounter, every opinion you encounter, you should subject it to reason. You should actually look at it honestly and really think it through. How many people have really done that with everything they think, with everything they believe? virtually zero. You have these assumptions, you take them for granted, and you filter everything through that. So continuing, he says, question with boldness even the existence of a God. What? What? Question with boldness even the existence of a God. Because if there be one, he must more approve the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear. You will naturally examine first the religion of your own country. Okay. That's interesting. So, your country... Now, when he says the religion of your country, sounds like Mark Levin might be right. This country was a Christian nation. Perhaps, or perhaps that was just the religion of most people in the country. I think, based on the context of having read all this already, that's more what he means. But you can look at it for yourself. But this is interesting. It says, read the Bible then, as you would Livy or Tacitus, which are, I believe, Roman historians, right? Let's see. Yeah, a Roman historian. Yeah, so he's just saying you should read the Bible as if you were reading one of these historians. The facts which are within the ordinary course of nature, you will believe on the authority of the writer, right? So, for example, if you're reading a historian and the historian says, Joe walked down the street to the store, and then he saw George Washington, right? Whatever. Okay, I mean, that's what he's saying happened, so I'll just take it on his authority because I've already accepted that this guy is an authority on the subject. Now, how do I know he's an authority? I don't think that's the point here. It's just like they've got a track record. They've said things that we've verified. So when he says something happened that seems like a normal thing to happen, we'll just take it on his authority. So as you do those, the same kind in Livy and Tacitus. So do that with the Bible is what he's saying. If in the Bible it says Moses picked up his staff and walked across a hill, well, if you assume that whoever wrote that story is an authority, then that's fine. Like, why would I be like, well, how do I know he walked? You don't need to be overly critical from that perspective. The testimony of the writer weighs in their favor in one scale, and their not being against the laws of nature does not weigh against them. But those facts in the Bible which contradict the laws of nature must be examined with more care and under a variety of faces. Here you must recur to the pretensions of the writer, to inspiration from God. So in other words, he's saying focus on, for example, the pretensions of the writer to inspiration from God, meaning if the writer is saying, I'm inspired by God, that's something we should maybe consider a little bit more, with a little bit more scrutiny. Examine upon what evidence his pretensions are founded, and whether that evidence is so strong that its falsehood would be more probable than a change of the laws of nature in the case he relates. So if I said, well, I'm inspired by God, and so this one day I saw Joe walking down the street, and then you wouldn't believe it, but he grew wings out of the back of his back and flew off and flew to China and carried on his back 5 elephants all the way back from China. You'd be like, okay, that doesn't make sense. So in other words, how do we know he's inspired by God? Well, if he starts saying things that are against the laws of nature, that might call it into question. For example, in the book of Joshua, we are told the sun stood still. The sun stood still for several hours. Were we to read that fact in Livy or Tacitus, we should class it with their showers of blood, speaking of statues, beasts, etc. Now, I'm going through this very slowly and explaining my perspective on it of what I think it means, because I think most people reading this would probably be lost after the first sentence, okay? And I'm not saying that to insult anybody, but I just know that that is the case. Because they wouldn't have the context of who the hell Livy is, or Tacitus, right? So, or what is he talking about? Livy and Tacitus, showers of blood. But clearly what he's saying is they might speak of things like that in their histories. Okay. But it is said that the writer of that book was inspired. So they might talk about showers of blood, speaking of statues, but they were inspired. Examine, therefore, candidly what evidence there is of his having been inspired. The pretension is entitled to your inquiry, because millions believe it. Okay. On the other hand, you are astronomer enough to know how contrary it is to the law of nature that a body revolving on its axis as the earth does should have stopped. Should not by that sudden stoppage have prostrated animals, trees, buildings? And should after a certain time have resumed its revolution, and that without a second general prostration? Meaning, if the earth stood still for a moment, or the sun, right? What did it say? The sun stood still? Yeah. Wouldn't that like cause a physical problem if everything's based on gravity and suddenly something stands still in relation to each other? Like that would cause everybody to probably like fall over or something, and then suddenly it starts revolving again. Then like you'd be like, whoa, shit! Like, you know, like imagine when you're in your car and you suddenly hit the brakes. Like you're gonna be like, whoa. That's called just the normal laws of nature. Is this arrest of the earth's motion, or the evidence which affirms it most within the laws of probabilities? Okay, so is that likely that that was true? You will read next the New Testament. It is the history of a personage called Jesus. Keep in your eye the opposite pretensions. Of those who say he was begotten by God, born of a virgin, suspended and reversed the laws of nature at will, and ascended bodily into heaven. And of those who say he was a man of illegitimate birth, of a benevolent heart, enthusiastic mind, who set out without pretensions to divinity, ended in believing them, and was punished capitally for sedition by being gibbeted according to the Roman law, which, you want to know what gibbeted means? Killed. All right. By being gibbeted according to the Roman law, which punished the first commission of that offense by whipping. Interesting. I didn't know that before. So they should have just whipped him. And the second by exile or death. So why did they just kill him right away? That is weird. Anyways, so these questions are examined in the books I have mentioned under the head of religion and several others. They will assist you in your inquiries. But keep your reason firmly on the watch in reading them all. Do not be frightened from this inquiry by any fear of its consequences. If it ends in a belief that there is no God, you will find incitements to virtue in the comfort and pleasantness you feel in its exercise, and the love of others which it will procure you. If you find reason to believe there is a God, a consciousness that you are acting under his eye, and that he approves you, will be a vast additional incitement. If that there be a future state, so like heaven, the hope of a happy existence in that increases the appetite to deserve it. That's an interesting, anyways. If that Jesus was also a God, you will be comforted by a belief of his aid and love. In fine, I repeat, that you must lay aside all prejudice on both sides, and neither believe nor reject anything, because any other person or description of persons have rejected or believed it. Your own reason is the only oracle given you by heaven. That is like a really cool statement. Your own reason is the only oracle given you by heaven. That is like really cool statement. And you are answerable not, I like this one too. And you are answerable not for the rightness, but the uprightness of the decision. I forgot to observe when speaking of the New Testament that you should read all the histories of Christ, as well as those whom a council of ecclesiastics, so like a council of the church, right, have decided for us to be pseudo-evangelists, as those they named evangelists, because these pseudo-evangelists pretended to inspiration as much as the others, and you are to judge their pretensions by your own reason and not by the reason of those ecclesiastics. This is such a cool point too. So if you don't already know a lot about the history of, let's say, the Catholic Church or just the Christian churches in general, like, and a lot of people are aware of this now, so I don't know if you in particular are aware of this, but there's a lot of books that were not put into the Bible, right? Let's see. And even in Catholic versus other not Protestant, so Catholic versus Protestant, there are other books that they don't both accept, and I think that's called the Apocrypha. But even between Catholic and just Protestant, there are some books they don't agree on, where like they'll be in the Catholic Bible but not some other specific denominations. I mean, this is a little bit more extreme example, but the Book of Mormon is an obvious example where they're like, no, that's not in the Bible. But let's see. Oh, I just realized I haven't even been sharing the damn letter this whole time. That's embarrassing. It's just been me talking. That's okay. I'll just give you a few minutes here. I'll give you about 20 seconds. Just read through this, right, real quick. Okay, all right, good. So now you got it. But I will keep it on from now on. Okay, so let's see. Books not accepted in the Bible. Let's just see what that brings up. Bart Ehrman. He's an interesting guy. I've watched a lot of his stuff too. Let's see. There's the Old Testament Apocrypha. Okay, that was the word I was looking for. So Protestants decided to remove them from their version of the Bible, and I think meaning that the Catholics kept them in. Okay, here we go. Is that all of them? No, that can't be all. So that's just the Old Testament ones. All right. But there's like a lot more than that. Here we go. Books once considered canonical. Apocalypse of Peter. That sounds crazy. The Gospel according to Hebrews. So there's a bunch of books there that you probably never even heard of. Shepherd of Hermas. And then here's some early Christian writings. Let's see, where's the actual list? That's not even all the ones I was thinking of. Gospel of Thomas, for example. Here we go. A non-canonical sayings gospel. So they don't include this in the Bible, but it's some book of the Bible. Well, I guess you can't say it's of the Bible, but it's some Christian book they discovered. These are the hidden words that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote them down. Most scholars do not consider the Apostle Thomas the author of this document. The author remains unknown. And that might sound like, oh, see, because he didn't really write it. But I mean, do you not realize that the Gospel of Mark wasn't written by Mark? They just put his name on it. You can look that up. That's not even like a conspiracy theory. It's sayings attributed to Jesus. So you've got all these things apparently Jesus said, but it's not included in the Bible. That's weird. Why would it not be included in the Bible? I'm trying to see if there's any justification. The late camp dates Thomas sometime after 100 AD, generally in the 2nd century. Okay, so there's just basically they have some disagreement about it, right? I'm not going to go into reading the whole thing right now because I could look up this thing and you can see some of the stuff that it says. It's really irrelevant. But I just wanted to show you, like, there are a lot of books that were not considered canon. But who decided that? A council of ecclesiastics, a council of, like, church authorities that said we don't want to put those in there. And his point, so they call us a pseudo-evangelist, right? He says they pretended to inspiration as much as the others. So they said they were inspired. So why are they not included? It's like, well, we think they weren't inspired. Well, how do you know who was inspired and who wasn't? All right? So I think it's like there's a lot of subtlety to this point he's making, and there's a lot of, not subtlety, but there's a lot more context to it, but that's why I want to explain. Because at the time, everyone was aware of this. Like, yeah, there's books that we didn't include because the church authorities said they don't belong in there, right? And they have their reasons, but their reasons are generally boiling down to them not actually be inspired. But how would they know if they were inspired or not if the person says they were inspired? Would that be any different than Thomas Jefferson saying, well, don't take anything that's being said based on the fact that they're inspired, even if it's in the Holy Bible? So I like this letter because it just shows his thought process around really look at the information critically. And if it doesn't make sense, you don't have to believe it. Like you should look at what's being said and ask yourself, like, is this just now, okay, does it matter if the sun really stood still or not? You could just say, well, they just were exaggerating or something. Fine. But saying that Jesus was literally God is also a pretty big statement. And the person who wrote that down doesn't have any proof of that. But because they were inspired by God, you're assuming, well, even though this claim is pretty out there, it must be true because they were inspired. Okay. So I'm going to go to this letter. So I think this one is really, really, really interesting. So this one's 1820, William Short. I owe you a letter. Okay, he's got to do his whole thing here. All right. My aim in that was to justify the character of Jesus against the fictions of his pseudo-followers, which have exposed him to the inference of being an impostor. For if we could believe that he really countenanced the follies, the falsehoods, and the charlatanisms which his biographers father on him, and admit the misconstructions, interpolations, and theorizations of the fathers of the early and fanatics of the later ages, the conclusion would be irresistible by every sound mind that he was an impostor. I give no credit to their falsifications of his actions and doctrines, and to rescue his character, the postulate in my letter asked only what is granted in reading every other historian. So it's kind of like what he was saying back in that previous one. When Livy or Siculus, for example, tell us things which coincide with our experience of the order of nature, we credit them on their word, and place their narrations among the records of credible history. But when they tell us of calves speaking, of statues sweating blood, and other things against the courts of nature, we reject these as fables, not belonging to history. In like manner, when an historian, speaking of a character well known and established on satisfactory testimony, imputes to it things incompatible with that character, we reject them without hesitation, and dissent to that only of which we have better evidence. Had Plutarch informed us that Caesar and Cicero passed their whole lives in religious exercises and abstinence from the affairs of the world, we should reject what was so inconsistent with their established characters, still crediting what he relates in conformity with their ideas of them. So again, the superlative wisdom of Socrates is testified by all antiquity. So there's this so much of everybody talking about the wisdom of Socrates that we don't really need to question if in another book someone's talking about the wisdom of Socrates, because it's like kind of a consensus, right? That's the character that we accept Socrates to be, that he was wise. When therefore Plato puts into his mouth, meaning Socrates, such fancies, such paralogisms, and sophisms as a schoolboy would be ashamed of, we conclude that they were whimsies of Plato's own foggy brain, and acquit Socrates of puerilities so unlike his character. So if Plato says, yeah, and then he, Plato said something retarded, basically, or acted like like an immature child, we're like, yeah, I guess Plato is just like making shit up, basically, right? Speaking of Plato, I will add that no writer, ancient or modern, has bewildered the world with more ignis fatui. Let's see what that is. Will-o'-the-wisp. So basically, like, fantastic, it's like someone talking about they saw a ghost or something, right? So it's like he's got a lot of that stuff in there. No one has done that more than this renowned philosopher in ethics, in politics, and physics. In the latter, to specify a single example, compares views of the animal economy in his Timaeus with those of Mrs. Bryan in her conversations on chemistry, and weigh the science of the canonized philosopher against the good sense of the unassuming lady. So obviously we don't have the context for that, but probably he was saying things that are just downright like dumb, like, I don't know, maybe he said something like, chickens, the eggs actually come from, I don't know what he said because I don't have the context for it. But basically he's saying they would say a lot of stuff that later, just like normal people who have studied chemistry or science know that that's total bullshit. But Plato's visions have furnished a basis for endless systems of mystical theology, and he is therefore all but adopted as a Christian saint, which is interesting. Because if you take Plato, they brought the church, the Catholic, I don't know if they were even called Catholic at the time, the only Christian church, really, the official Christian church at the time, many, thousands of years ago now, but let's say the first 300, 400, 500, 600 years or so, they took a lot of Plato's philosophy and brought that into Christianity. And in fact, that guy we were looking at earlier, I mentioned that I had listened to some of his stuff, Bart Ehrman. He talks a lot about this, actually. That like a lot of the Christian ideas about the soul, for example, that doesn't come from Jesus. It doesn't come from what anybody even believed in at the time of Jesus. It comes from applying Platonic philosophy as a layer on top of Christianity, and these were already Greek philosophical ideas about the soul. I mean, there's a lot of detail there, but a lot of these ideas, they brought them into Christianity. And so Christianity, at that time anyways, became more a reworking of Greek philosophy, but bringing in Jesus and God and all this other stuff into it, and kind of molding those into something, right? So that's what he's referring to there. It is surely time for men to think for themselves and to throw off the authority of names so artificially magnified. I mean, this guy is talking mad shit about Plato right now. Like, he did not like Plato. I'm just saying that based on what he's saying here. But to return from this parenthesis, I say that this free exercise of reason is all I ask for the vindication of the character of Jesus. So, to summarize, he's like, you need to take all the shit that's like supernatural, crazy, out there, whatever, that's not just like normal things, and throw it all out. Like, just ignore it, because it's just like if some, if you read Greek mythology, right? Zeus, and in Roman mythology they call him Jupiter, right? Athena, I believe it was Athena, was born out of Zeus's head. So are we supposed to take that literally? Like, there was actually a guy named Zeus, and his daughter just came out of his like literal physical head. Like, his daughter was in there and he just pulled her out of it. Like, that's obviously not a real thing. Maybe it's some kind of metaphor for something or whatever, but it's just like not real. So we discard that. We know that's fake. And I mean, I'm sure you do too. Like, when you read Greek mythology, you're like, well, this is obviously a bunch of made up bullshit, right? But why don't we do that for the Bible? Let's see, here we go. We find in the writings of his biographers matter of two distinct descriptions. First, a groundwork of vulgar ignorance, of things impossible, of superstitions, fanaticisms, and fabrications. Intermixed with these, again, are sublime ideas of the Supreme Being, aphorisms and precepts of the purest morality and benevolence, sanctioned by a life of humility, innocence, and simplicity of manners, neglect of riches, absence of worldly ambitions and honors, with an eloquence and persuasiveness which have not been surpassed. So I guess he's saying if you look at the actual, just if you take out all the supernatural stuff, you just look at the simplicity of how Jesus presented himself as a man and the things he was suggesting as what God is or what, goodness is as a human being, those were all really cool things. And we'll come back to this too, sublime ideas of the Supreme Being. It's actually really interesting, but he kind of goes into this more a little bit. They are far beyond their feeble. They are far beyond the powers of their feeble minds. Oh, sorry. Okay, let's go back. These could not be inventions of the groveling authors who relate them. Okay, this is really cool. He's like, obviously they could say something like, Jesus, took some loaves of bread and multiplied them and made new bread. Anybody could have thought of that. Like, you could read Harry Potter and get stuff like that. But the actual stuff he said in the sense of, like, love your neighbor as yourself, these kind of precepts, that had not existed before. And no one thought like that before. So he's basically saying a lot of the things Jesus brought in, the idea of having a life of humility, innocence, simplicity of manners, benevolence. Okay, and this will become more, let me just highlight that. This will become more obvious later, yeah. Because part of the thing too is, because we live today in 2026, your idea of how things were in the past, although you might assume they're like primitive or whatever or backwards, you still are projecting your idea of, it's like your total idea of how things work and what things mean and what's right and what's wrong onto the past. But it's not necessarily how people thought back then. So he's basically saying, like, some of the ideas that Jesus put forth were in a way revolutionary. Like, this had not been heard before. So, and he's justifying that by saying there's no way those authors thought of that themselves. So, not that it really matters, but he's saying if we're going to talk about Jesus, I think we can attribute to him those really cool ideas he had. But we don't have to assume all of the fantastical stuff just because. Like, that stuff the authors could have just made up for various reasons. But the stuff that really made a lot of sense and like was just real revolutionary in terms of thinking, that's the character of Jesus that we can accept as who he was. They are far beyond the powers of their feeble minds. They show that there was a character, the subject of their history, whose splendid conceptions were above all suspicion and of being interpolations from their hands. Can we be at a loss in separating such materials and describing each to its genuine author? The difference is obvious to the eye and to the understanding, and we may read, as we run to each his part. And I will venture to affirm that he who, as I have done, will undertake to winnow this grain from its chaff, will find it not to require a moment's consideration. The parts fall asunder of themselves, as with those of an image of metal and clay. There are, I acknowledge, passages not free from objection, which we may with probability ascribe to Jesus himself, but claiming indulgence from the circumstances under which he acted. That's interesting. So he's saying there are some things that Jesus might have done or said that we can still object to. Maybe that, not from the perspective that we don't believe that it happened, but that we don't agree with him necessarily. But that maybe was just because of the circumstances he was within, he was in. And so he's going to explain that. So this is so cool. Like, it's not that I hadn't ever considered this perspective of Jesus, because I had, but to hear Thomas Jefferson, again, going back, all the context of he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was one of the main founding fathers. to see him having this perspective is so fascinating. Like when I first read this letter, like a couple days ago, it blew my mind. Okay, so he's talking about Jesus again. His object was the reformation of some articles in the religion of the Jews as taught by Moses. That seer, and I think he's referring to Jesus there, that seer had presented for the object of their worship. Oh no, he's talking about Moses when he says that seer. So Moses so think about the context of Moses. Like, he was the guy talking to God, and he presented the 10 Commandments, and he spoke to the people on behalf of God. It wasn't God talking to everybody. Moses was sort of the intermediary between God and the people. I'm pretty sure it was Moses that saw the burning bush, right? He actually communicated directly with God. He went up to the mountain, brought down the 10 Commandments, right? So there's all those stories. So if you go back for a second, the Jewish people, the Hebrews, whatever you want to refer to them as, at that time, they didn't talk to God directly. But now, Moses is like, I've been talking with God, and I'm going to tell you on behalf of God who God is, what he's all about, what are his rules, what is he suggesting we do and how we live, okay? So that's the context of Moses. That seer had presented for the object of their worship, so the Jews, the object of their worship, God being the object, a being of terrific character, cruel, vindictive, capricious, and unjust. I'll withhold comment for a second. Jesus taking for his type. So Jesus now is going to come and present who he says God is. Okay, so you got Moses, and by Jefferson's estimation or assessment, the God that Moses was presenting to the people was a vindictive, capricious, unjust, terrific, meaning like terrible, cruel character. So Jesus coming here, taking for his type, meaning his version of God, the best qualities of the human head and heart: wisdom, justice, goodness, and adding to them power, ascribed all of these, but in infinite perfection, to the Supreme Being, and formed him really worthy of their adoration. So in other words, Jesus came along in this context and presented a different version of God that is worth adoring. Like, if God really is wise and just and good and powerful, not power for power's sake, but actually powerful, able to do things, and infinitely perfect in those things, that would be something worth, I don't know if adore is, I don't know if I would say adore, but that would be something worth giving some sort of allegiance to, giving at least admiration of, or aspiration towards, or emulation of, right? Like if I said, no, actually God is this really kind, good, just being, you should be like that too. I mean, what's wrong with that, right? But think about it by contrast. If I said God is like this really cruel, unjust character, you should be like that. You should live your life. I mean, that's fucked, right? Okay, so Moses had either not believed in a future state of existence, heaven, or had not thought it essential to be explicitly taught to his people. So he didn't even talk about heaven. Like, this is seriously blowing my mind, because this way he's presenting Jesus is maybe not that different than how the average Christian perceives Jesus or his message necessarily. But the problem I always see with let's say generalized Christianity is that the Old Testament doesn't make any fucking sense if God is loving. They always try to portray it as that's just how he was in the context of dealing with the people at the time. It's all they understood. And like they weren't ready for anything else yet, which really doesn't make sense, because if that were true, that he couldn't do it until they were ready for it, they would already be living in a way where they were ready for it. But they weren't. Jesus came and they killed him. I mean, whether you believe it was the Jews that killed him, or whether you believe it was the Roman government that killed him, I'm not trying to blame anybody in particular. I'm just saying the world killed him. The world wasn't ready for the message, clearly, right? So that argument doesn't really make sense to me. And also, it's almost like an admission that, yeah, God was an asshole. But then, it was just because people, they needed God to be an asshole, and that's why he was like that. I'm like, so a better word actually is the word unjust. So God was unjust, but it was just because people weren't ready for justice. Okay, why would that change God? Why would God not still just be just? Why would he be capricious? Meaning, like, why would he change his mind about stuff? And see, for somebody who hasn't really studied the Bible, you could say, like, oh, that's unfair to characterize God like that. You don't understand. No, I've read the Bible. I've read the Old Testament. I've studied it. And I've studied not just reading it one time, like all the different perspectives, objections, apologetics, all of them. So again, I'm doing what Thomas Jefferson suggests, using my own reasoning process, trusting myself that if something makes sense, then it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, now maybe I don't understand it, but then I'm going to keep going because I want to understand it. But at a certain point, you have to say, okay, this actually doesn't make sense. Like if somebody said, actually 2 + 2 is 5, I'd be like, well, why do you say that? And then they would explain. And I would be like, well, that doesn't make sense. I'd say, well, no, it's 2 + 2 is 5 because when you have two things and you take another two things, if you count them, you get 5. I'd be like, no, you don't. That doesn't make, but maybe they would come up with some argument that would make it make sense. And I'd be like, okay, now it makes sense. Obviously, in that case, it's not going to make sense. But what I'm saying is when you look at Christian apologetics, it's the attempt to make stuff that doesn't make sense. That's why it exists. Because people look at the Bible, they don't yet believe it, or maybe they believe it, but they still have doubts and questions. So you have Christian apologists who try to go and explain why it all makes sense and why it actually is all good and it's not really a problem and there's no objection, there's no contradictions really. But let's just say there was an objection. I saw a contradiction. And I said, this looks like a contradiction. And someone says, yes, but so-and-so, like this guy Wes Huff, right? He's really big right now. He's a Christian apologist, going on all the podcasts. Well, Wes Huff already handled that. How did he handle it? It doesn't matter how he handled it. He did. Like, well, no, you explain to me how he handled it. If you understand it, now explain it. Okay, well, I don't understand. Just go talk to him. Okay, fine. So you don't understand. Well, let me go look at what Wes Huff is saying. So I'm going to look at what he says. I'm going to evaluate it. And I'm going to look at all the reasonings he's giving, and I'm going to investigate that. And then I'm going to look at it for myself. And I have to decide, does it make sense or not? In other words, it's not good enough as a Christian for someone to say, well, this apologist already handled it. It's okay for you to say that, but do you understand what they're saying and why it's handled? Or are you like, man, this guy just really knows his Bible and he knows all the context and he has all the information. Like he just knows that stuff and he made it. He says it makes sense. It's like, well, but are you just accepting it because you see him as some kind of authority? Or does it actually make sense to you? In which case you wouldn't have needed to say he said it, right? Unless you're just being lazy and you want me to go look at that instead of having to repeat everything, which, okay, that's one way of looking at it. But if I'm saying to you, well, no, like, I'm not going to go watch that. I'm actually interested in talking to you right now. Like, can you help me understand or can you explain it? And they can't. That kind of indicates they don't really understand. So if you go back to some of the previous letters we were looking at, he's warning, I think it was Peter Carr he was writing to. He was like, don't just accept things on the authority of the person who's saying it, or just because apparently some church decreed that it's all good. Like, actually look at the argument for yourself. I know I'm saying some really just out there things here. Actually look at it for yourself. But you have to, because, and this is a thing I think people really, when I say people, I mean especially Christians, but I think I would think everyone does this, whether they're atheists or Christians or Muslim or whatever. Well, yeah, even atheists fall into this, actually, because an atheist says, well, science has already proven that. Okay, but do you understand why it's proven? Or are you like, well, but Richard Dawkins proved that 5 years ago? It's like, okay, maybe he did. But when Richard Dawkins, or whatever scientist, comes up with a theory and they present it to their colleagues, this is what we call peer review, which what it's supposed to be anyways, is this other people look at it and go, that makes sense, I agree. That doesn't make it true, but it does lend some kind of credibility to it. However, if I, as a person who do not have that scientific training, have to just take the word of other people who have it, that's a problem. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we all lived through 2020, and we saw what happens when people just trust authority. Same thing, that's what's going on in the world right now in terms of the war. We're just trusting the authority is telling us the truth, but show us the actual information. Show us the evidence, you know? And I understand the argument. We can't tell you all the secrets, because if we told you all the secrets of what we know, the enemy would know about our military capabilities that we want to keep secret. Okay, fine. But then what is it? Just trust me, bro? Like, how can we live like that? How can we have a world where, if you're paying attention, it's getting real fucking weird out there. A lot of weird stuff's happening. You got the Epstein stuff. You got so much weird shit going on. It's kind of making it seem like they've all just been lying about everything this whole time. So anyways, my point is just, we have to, as human beings, start learning to trust ourselves and our own reasoning ability. And if we can't, the answer isn't go just accept what the authority says. The answer is develop the ability to reason. Develop the ability to read. Develop the ability to actually look at information, process it without bias, and then make an assessment. And guess what? When you do that, guess who's responsible for whatever assessment you make? You. Part of the subconscious desire to accept authority as the answer is you don't really want to be responsible, so you can blame them. I mean, I'm just telling you, that's what it is. You just want to be able to blame somebody else. So it's like, well, Wes Huff said it, or Richard Dawkins said it. So it's like, well, okay, but do you understand it? No, but I trust their authority. Okay, so when you find out they're wrong, are you going to take responsibility for trusting them? Or are you just going to blame them? Well, they lied to me. I can't believe they would have lied to me. It's like, well, why did you believe them? Who told you they were the authority? Even if 1,000 experts told you they were the authority, you still accepted that they were the authority. No one else can make you accept something other than you. This is the major problem I have with the concept of God in general. It's not the good things about God that I have a problem with. If those good things are things that we can emulate, I mean, it's the points where people offload their responsibility for what they accept and allow in their life or in themselves or in this world because somebody else is taking care of it. And I trust the authority of that thing. Okay. Well, it's just going to get worse if we do that. Okay. Let's see here. Jesus inculcated that doctrine with emphasis and precision. I think he's talking about the future state of existence. This is where it starts to get really good. Moses had bound the Jews to many idol ceremonies, mummeries, and observances of no effect towards producing the social utilities which constitute the essence of virtue. Jesus exposed their futility and insignificance. The one instilled into his people the most antisocial spirit towards other nations. The other preached philanthropy and universal charity and benevolence. Like, what? This is starting to sound kind of anti-Semitic, to be honest. I don't know if I'm comfortable with reading this. Moses had bound the Jews to many idol ceremonies, mummeries. What does he mean by mummeries? A performance by mummers. I don't think. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Ridiculous. Yeah. Okay. So just like some weird ritual that doesn't really do anything. You're just doing it because you're told to do it, basically, right? I like that word. And observances of no effect towards producing the social utilities which constitute the essence of virtue. Meaning, these things they're doing, these rituals and so forth, don't produce anything good for anybody. They're just things you're doing because you believe God wants you to do it. And it's just you proving, I guess, I mean, I'm kind of adding something here, but it's like you're just proving to God, I obey you because I did the thing you told me to do, even though it produced no good in the world or in my life. But you notice, like with Jefferson, like he keeps coming back to the point of like the social utility. Like, does this actually do something good for the world? Because that should be the basis of morality, of ethics. Does it actually produce something that's of benefit to people? That's the essence of virtue. Jesus exposed their futility and insignificance. So he's basically like, Jesus came in and was like, God's not what you're saying he is. He's actually this really good thing, and we should be like that. And all the stuff you're doing is really irrelevant to making the world better. And he exposed that. The one instilled into his people, so talking about Moses, the most antisocial spirit towards other nations. The other, Jesus, preached philanthropy and universal charity and benevolence. The office of reformer of the superstitions of a nation is ever dangerous. So he's saying Jesus was reforming the superstitions of a nation. Jesus had to walk on the perilous confines of reason and religion. That's interesting. So he's like, I think it speaks for itself. Jesus had to walk on the perilous confines of reason and religion, and a step to right or left might place him within the gripe of the priests of the superstition. A bloodthirsty race, as cruel and remorseless as the being whom they represented as the family God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, and the local God of Israel. So he's basically, Thomas Jefferson is not down with the God of the Old Testament. And he's like, Jesus had to walk in here and try to tell people, hey, you could live differently in a way that actually benefits everybody. But he had to sort of be very careful because he's challenging all... Because think about, what's the objection? What? No, you don't. God told us to do these things. If I don't, God will kick my ass. So I don't want God to kick my ass. And he's like, why do you want to believe in that God? Like, well, because he'll kick my ass. Fine. You know what? God told me that's not really who he is. You totally misunderstood him. So he's not going to kick your ass. He's going to forgive you, actually. But you got to do things that are good in the world and consider people and consider the effect of your actions and if it's actually producing something good. So obviously, if you think about it from the perspective of the priest class, they would have been like, no, my whole thing that I've got going on here is that I'm the expert of all the rituals you got to do. And now you're fucking with, my job, basically. They were constantly laying snares, too, to entangle him in the web of the law. He was justifiable, therefore, in avoiding those by evasions, by sophisms, by misconstructions and misapplications of scraps of the prophets, and in defending himself with these, their own weapons, as sufficient ad homines at least. Oh. I didn't want to assume it just meant ad hominem. It's just the plural of that word. Okay, let me take a break for there. So, it's so interesting because I was reading something the other day, and it was the statement about when Jesus said to the Pharisees or whoever, oh yeah, they had kind of cornered him, and they were going to stone him, and he said, why I think it was stoning. They were like, why are you going to stone me? And they said, because you're blaspheming. No, because he said, all the things that I've been doing are like good things, like feeding the people or whatever he's been doing. He's like, I haven't been doing anything harming anybody. What is exactly my crime here? And they said, you did the worst crime, blaspheming God. Which, I don't know if the context was they were saying he was claiming he was God, or they were just saying he was saying God is not the thing you're saying he is. And he said, oh, really? So you're saying I'm blaspheming God? Oh, yeah, because they said you're claiming to be God. That's apparently the thing, right? And not that it really matters too much for the context of this, but when I read about this, the person I was listening to, because obviously I went and looked at these verses, but the video that initially I was looking at, the person was saying that part was actually written into the Bible in a way to, it was like retconned into the Bible so that it would look like Jesus was claiming to be God. Like they put that story in there so that later when Paul comes along and says Jesus was actually God, even though let's say Jesus didn't actually say that, they had to throw that story in there to be like, no, yeah, remember back here he said that's why they were stoning him, because he was saying he was God. Remember. But anyways, that aside, they said, okay, you're claiming to be God, and that's like the worst thing you can do. And he said, yes, but isn't it written in your law that ye are all gods, or that you are gods? And it's referring to some verse, I think from Samuel, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it's Psalms. I can't remember. Maybe either way, it's in the Old Testament, obviously. And I was looking at that, like, why would he say that? Jesus said, ye are gods. Psalms. Okay, it was Psalms. Jesus quotes Psalms. So he's quoting the Bible at them, or the Psalms, the Old Testament, back to them. You are God, Son of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die. I don't know why he had to add that part. That was kind of a little bit provoking. But I was looking at that, and I'm like, why would he say that? Why would he say, in your book it says you are gods? Was that what he was implying? Either he was implying, I'm telling you, you guys are gods. It says in the Bible, you're God, so I can say I'm God, because it says we're all gods. Or maybe it's just the priests are gods. So he's like, it says in the Bible, you are gods, so is it blasphemy if I say I am? I'm following all the laws. I'm following all of the rituals. I'm doing everything that we're supposed to do. If he was God, why wouldn't he just be like, yeah, you're damn right, I'm God. Worship me. Like, I'm the God you're praying to. If that's what he was here to do, if he was here to show people that he was God, why, when he was pressed on the point, would he say like, well, but you got in the Bible it says you're God too? It just doesn't make any sense. But this perspective from Jefferson makes that make a lot more sense. Because he's like, where'd it go? He was justifiable, therefore, in avoiding these evasions by sophisms, by misconstructions and misapplications of scraps of the prophets, and in defending himself with these their weapons as sufficient, ad hominems at least. That Jesus did not mean to impose himself on mankind as the Son of God, physically speaking, I have been convinced by the writings of men more learned than myself in that lore. So I don't think he's saying he believes them. He's just like, I've read a lot of people and they've given a lot of arguments and I'm convinced. So he didn't think that Jesus was the Son of God, physically speaking. Like he is God, the physical Son of God, God himself on earth. But that he might conscientiously believe himself inspired from above is very possible. The whole religion of the Jews, inculcated on him from his infancy, was founded in the belief of divine inspiration. So he's like, I'm totally convinced he did not think he was actually God himself. However, he might have thought he was inspired by God at some level because that was normal in their culture, totally normal for people to have divine inspiration. The fumes of the most disordered imaginations were recorded in their religious code as special communications of the deity. And as it could not but happen that, In the course of ages, events would now and then turn up to which some of these vague rhapsodies might be accommodated by the aid of allegories, figures, types, and other tricks upon words. They have not only preserved their credit with the Jews of all subsequent times, but are the foundations of much of the religions who have schismatized from them. Elevated by the enthusiasm of a warm and pure heart, conscious of the high strains of an eloquence which had not been taught him, he might readily mistake the coruscations of his own fine genius for inspirations of a higher order. I mean, he's like, damn, I'm actually pretty good at talking, and I got some really great ideas. Like, this must come from God, I guess. Like, I don't know. Like, did I just think of these things? I'm not really sure, but maybe I... So it's like, yeah, we can let that slide. Maybe he thought he was inspired by God, but I don't think he was saying he was God. That's what I think Jefferson's saying. This belief carried, therefore, no more personal imputation than the belief of Socrates that himself was under the care and admonitions of a guardian daemon. He's like, look, man, I don't know where I get these good ideas from. They make a lot of sense, but maybe God is like inspired me to say this or something. But regardless, like, it makes sense what I'm saying, right? And how many of our wisest men still believe in the reality of these inspirations while perfectly sane on other subjects? Yeah, look at famous scientists. What's that guy? It's not a scientist. He's a music producer, Rick Rubin. Listen to him talk. He's like, I meditate, and then I go into like another dimension, and music is just like downloaded into my brain, and then I wake up and I'm like, okay, so here's the song, you know, like he thinks he's channeling information from another dimension. All he knows is it comes into his brain, and where the hell does it come from? I don't know, but it's just, well, I don't know. But listen to the song I made. It's pretty damn good. Excusing, therefore, on these considerations, those passages in the Gospels which seem to bear marks of weakness in Jesus, ascribing to him what alone is consistent with the great and pure character of which the same writings furnish proofs, and to their proper authors their own trivialities and imbecilities, I think myself authorized to conclude the purity and distinction of his character, in opposition to the impostures which these authors would fix upon him, and that the postulate of my former letter is no more than is granted in all other historical works. I'm just curious what... Oh, I have not read this one. Might read that later. That's cool. I have to check that one out. Let's see. Just looking to see if there's anything else relevant. Just talking about some stuff with the war, and I guess, or... Okay. So... I probably have one more thing I want to go over before I stop. But I guess, like, what I see within all of this, you know, obviously it's a very long explanation to get to this point, but, you know, I could just come on here and say, well, you know, I read Thomas Jefferson, and he was not a Christian. Not in any sense you're thinking. Like, definitely not connecting Judaism and Christianity, and like, you got to bring the one with the other, and if you don't believe in the founding of this country. I could just say that, and you could say, cool story, bro, like, nice opinion. But I'm just reading Thomas Jefferson's letters of stuff that he said. Now, I don't know how much the average person, well, I know the average person cannot comprehend most of this, right? That's why I'm trying to do my best to give you my interpretation of it, but, you know, it's not like I'm making up stuff. I'm just reading what he wrote. Somebody's knocking on my door. Okay, so anyways, what was I talking about? Oh, I mean, obviously, you know, this whole point of, like, if you don't accept this particular religious connection, you don't believe in the founding. I'm just trying to show you, like, that is total horseshit, man. And it's not because I'm against any particular person, any particular group, that I would want harm to come to anybody. But how many fucking people are going to watch Fox News and then be okay with us being like bombarding another country where at some level, quote unquote, innocent people are going to be killed, and I'm sure that will at some level include children. And the reasoning behind of why we have to be behind it is I'm against the founding, and I'm against the country, because I don't accept this war that's attacking this other group that is of this religion, which is connected to this other religion, which is connected to the founding of my country. And I have to accept all that, and I would rather everyone just stop fucking killing each other. That would be an interesting idea. But when you go back and you look at his whole thing about, and this is not to be an anti-Jewish thing, okay? Don't misunderstand me. So I'm not making this specific, but if you look at what Jefferson's saying, this God, right? Which this God is the God of the Christians, right? Ask them, the God of the Old Testament, is that your God? They'll say, yes, of course. Did he murder people in the Bible? Yes, but there was a reason for it. But yeah, well, there's a reason for why we're at war right now. There's a reason for it. And it's justified by all this religious stuff. Is that really the reason they're doing it? Maybe not. Okay? This is not an anti-religion thing. I'm just saying a lot of people are just like, oh, it's okay, so religion, I'm a part of that religion. And so that connects to the war, and therefore, I don't want to be against the country. So yeah, keep bombing people. As if it's going to fucking solve anything. So here's the last thing I'll show you. Go back here. The Declaration of Independence. So celebrating the triumph of the American spirit. What is the American spirit? I'm not going to read this whole thing. But it is interesting. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. All men are created equal. Now, obviously, you can say, oh, not women. Like, well, man doesn't just mean male. Man means humanity. All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so we got all this stuff. It's great. Look at this. The separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them. Not God's nature, but nature's God. That's interesting. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So this is where they're declaring their separation from the British government, I suppose. But look at this part. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. So don't take it lightly. Don't just do it on a whim. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So it's much easier just to kind of go with the flow, even when it gets really bad. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. Now, it's very interesting because it says to throw off such government, and immediately what comes to a person's mind is violence. A military coup, take over the government, do all this stuff, right? That's not going to work. I'm not advocating that. it wouldn't work. It wouldn't do anything. And I'm not going to go into a whole nother long discussion. I've got so much I could share, but practically, this will just be on my next streams probably, unless I do something else. But, you know, I guess I kind of envision these streams as being sort of a very long conversation in parts. But I'm just reading the chat. There's actually a chat. It didn't look like anyone was chatting, except one person saying no Mexicans in this chat, please. Okay. The point I want to get to, and maybe that's next stream, which I'm not sure when I'll do it. Maybe, I don't know if I'll do it tomorrow or in a couple days. I'm not sure yet. I don't have a schedule yet, but the world that we live in, the systems that run our world are in the process of collapsing. Now, this is not something I'm saying for the first time here. Like, I've been saying this for very explicitly 24 years, right? And before that, I was only seeing that my world was crumbling. And I could see the starting point, and I won't go into right now how I saw that. That's for other streams, but I could see that based on the starting point of how everyone lives their life, this world that we live in, this human created reality on top of the physical reality that's here, you know, the governments, the money system, the education system, your job, all that stuff that we've added to it as human beings is doomed because it's not based on anything real. It's not based on anything other than just how you feel and your desire to feel good, which is not a bad thing in itself. But do you have a right to feel good at someone else's expense? I mean, you certainly wouldn't say a rapist has a right to feel good at the expense of the person they're raping. You wouldn't say that. Nobody would say that, except them, I suppose. But they wouldn't like if it happened to them. And so it's so simple. It's so simple, the answer to all the problems in this world. And yet, it's the one thing nobody wants to hear because it interferes with your apparent ability to choose your life, your destiny, your experience based on what you feel. And over the next course of however many streams, I will break that down even further to show you that on the one hand, that's actually what Jesus was here to show everybody. It wasn't about God being the answer. It was about you and me being the answer. Because that's the one thing we've never actually considered is, who am I really? Why am I here really? What is the purpose of being here really? Why is the world the way it is? It's because we're not answering those questions for ourselves. We're looking to somebody else with some answer, and we're just accepting that answer. It's just really lazy, actually. And when I read the Declaration of Independence, and I look at this, it's like, you have a duty. You have a duty. Again, let's not misunderstand. This is not about violence. But like Buckminster Fuller said, you don't create a system by attacking the old one. You create something new in its place. That doesn't mean you can't criticize the old system, because in the criticism you can see what went wrong and why. Also, sometimes you have to criticize it so other people realize there's something fucking wrong. So if you're just like, no, just create a new one, and everyone says, why do we need a new one? Well, that's a problem in itself. But it's becoming more and more apparent. And I'll show some more maybe on my next stream. I mean, I'm just looking at social media. Obviously, I'm talking to people in real physical world too. It's no different, but it's so apparent on social media now. So many people are just like, dude, fuck this world. I don't want to live anymore. I don't know what's going on. I'm having an existential crisis. And that is not sustainable, because we're about to add artificial intelligence at a level and a scale no one even understands right now into all of this. It's going to fuck everybody's world up. And I have children. I'm also a human being that's here right now, and I would like to have a great life, but I certainly, at the very least, want my children to have a good life. And the way things are going, that seems very unlikely. But I'm not just going to sit here and not fucking do anything about it, not say anything about it. So ultimately, I'm looking to find other people that see enough that something is not right, but they don't know the answer yet as to why exactly. They don't understand what's the solution, because it's not violence. And I guarantee you that is going to be more and more what people turn to, unfortunately. That is also a symptom of the fact that our system is so fucked, that our world is so broken. And I don't accept the Christian excuse, or whatever religion excuse, that, well, we're just broken, and that's why we need God. So, without going on a long lecture about it, I'll save that for another stream, but if you're watching this now, or you're watching it on a replay, hypothetically, I will show you, and I will prove to you that there is a solution to all of this, and that it's actually to your best benefit. And when I explain it, I'm not asking you to believe anything I say, but when I explain it, and if you stick around and you listen and you ask questions, there's a chat apparently, which I wasn't paying attention to this whole time, but I don't have it on here. I think maybe I'm just not seeing the things as they come in, if there even are. I have no idea. But I'll get that sorted out. It's my first time using this platform, so I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. But I will prove to you that this world, I was going to say it can be fixed, but that's not really the right word for it. We can create a new world. We can create heaven here on earth. It is possible. I know it is possible. And if everyone knew what I knew, they would know it's possible too. And only when that happens will it be possible. In fact, it won't be possible just because I believe it and because I'm so amazing, because I'm not. I'm just another human being just like you, just like everybody else. But I see very clearly how we can solve these problems. And I've spent a lot of time over my life sorting out all the shit inside of me, so that I no longer accept that I'm just broken and it's just the way it is and only God can fix me. Or only science can fix me. Or only science can make us better. Technology will save us. I don't care if you're an atheist. I don't care if you believe in God. It doesn't really matter, because none of those things are the solution to the problem. So, without overdoing it, I'll leave it at that for today. For tonight. I think I will play a little song on the way out.
No crash, slow crash, snow crash, tongue slip, white noise in the head. Snow crash, say it till it's said. Snow crash, brain freeze, blackout. Snow crash, slip. White nose in the head, in the head. Snow crash, no crash, no crash, no crash. Say it till it's set. No mask to perform. Every thought a uniform. Free will, I'ma pay monthly charge. Meaning gone, but system warm. Old guys dead, rebranded. Favorite package, rubber stamp. If the loop keeps paying interest, why would anyone dismantle? Say it once, now it's law. Say it twice, now it's me. Mirror speaks, I answer back like I picked the frequency. Don't pause, don't question, just repeat the sound. If the language run your life, who's the thinker now? Snow crash, no crash. Don't blame. No crash. I just snow crash. Don't blame. No crash. Don't blame. No crash. Don't think. Snow crash. No virus, no war. Just these in the skies. If the sense breathes for me, who survives, me or the lie?